Hi, I'm Donna R. Madden, author, book lover, and your host of Books, Banter, and Beyond, the podcast for everyone who believes in the power of stories, the people who create them, and the communities that celebrate them. Whether you're a reader, a writer, or someone who just loves everything bookish, this is your space. Welcome. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Books, Banter, and Beyond. I am Donna Madden, your host, and I am here today with Zachariah Chamberlin. He is a horror author, so I'm excited to talk to him because, as you all know, I don't read horror, but I am sure he's going to talk me into it. So, Zach, how are you?
I'm great. Busy. Yeah. Part of being a self-published author is also you have to work a job and sometimes an extra job. And of course, you have to take care of family. And then, of
Absolutely.
course, writing and publishing all at the same time on our own. So it's a busy life.
Yeah, that is so true. And I don't know if people really understand all the hats indie authors actually wear, but we will get into that. Mm-hmm. But before we get into all that, tell us about you as a person and you as an author and what you write and everything.
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up on horror. For me, horror films, horror stories, all that stuff was my comfort food growing up. I started off really early watching the scary movies, the old Vincent Price films, the stuff that came out in the 70s. And a lot of that's because of the fact that like my mother would let me stay up late and hang out with her and cuddle up on the couch, and she would watch Friday Fright Night. And, she would check in on me and she's like, is this okay? And I'm like, absolutely. This is so cool. I didn't say that as a kid, but yes, that's my reaction. Right. And it's funny because those nights spent with her were so meaningful, especially I had a very chaotic childhood. There's a lot that went on, and that was like just her and I, our little like Friday night dates. And just kind of these bonding moments, they meant so much to me. And even now, that's when I watch a good spooky movie, I think it kind of tugs on that little string a little bit,
As a mom, especially a mom of boys, I love that. That just shows how sometimes as parents, we don't think the little things we do mean something. Yeah. But, so hopefully I have embedded something into my boys, They're all in their 20s. So, and I know you have young kids.
Oh, yeah. I have two young girls, and both of them are just, one of them is itching to dive into horror because I write and watch a lot of horror. And she's like, I want to, do something. I was like, girlfriend, you can't. You sat through like the first 10 minutes of Stranger Things, episode 1, and that was it. And I was like, we're not there yet, but one day, maybe. Which is it's so interesting because I remember I was 6. My first horror film was American Werewolf in London, and I was like 6 years old. And I mean, that made such a huge impression on me. And it's funny because thinking back on it, I knew I was also going to be destined to be a guy who's always going to be in love with the final girl. Because every time in every horror film, even as a young age, I was always rooting for, the final girl. And since you don't know about horror, I can, go along. That's a big rabbit hole I could go right into.
Well, here's a horror that I grew up watching. I'm in my 50s, so I grew up in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. The Halloween, the original Halloweens, so that's what I grew up on. That's what I always watched, even though they scared the tar out of me. I watched them religiously every year for my birthday. I'd have all my friends over and we would watch the latest Jason movie or Freddy movie, and that's what we did. So, but, and I've watched them, but they scare me. I have a hard time with books. Because the books are so much more, books are just better. They're more descriptive and they're more there. So I cannot read a horror book until you talk me into it. But, so that there is that discrepancy between the two.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people who come to me and like when I do a book signing event, it's funny because it's 50-50, and I can always gauge now, even nowadays, I can talk to somebody for just a few minutes and be like, this person loves horror. It's just that there is a type. And it's funny because when I do a book signing event, people will walk by my table and I'll get two reactions, typically, like one of, like curiosity and, they're like wanting to like know more. And then that's the other one where I'm like, okay, this isn't their jam,
Right.
But I still approach everybody with the idea that it's like, well, but maybe you just don't know enough about horror. Maybe let me try to recruit you or like bring you into our little circle, just like we're doing right here,
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting because I run into the same thing as a romance author. People will walk by and turn their nose up at romance. I don't read romance. I read anything but that, So how do you go about, and I'm sure throughout this, our talk, you're going to be doing just that. But how do you turn someone around? What are the important things you feel someone needs to understand about the horror genre that maybe those of us who don't read it don't know?
Yeah, so it's interesting because one, as a horror author, 50% of the people who read my books or my stories happen to also be romance readers. And now that being said, it's more of the darker romance, or dark romantasy, people who really enjoy horror. And that's because there's a lot of parallels between dark romantasy and horror. And somebody explained it to me one time, that the difference between like dark romantasy, aside from the love story, and horror, is that dark romantasy or romantic stories tend to end with a happy ending.
Right.
That's not always true with horror. We look at the poor final girl, and at the end, in real life, we were like, no, she'd be in therapy and probably spending weeks, if not months, in the hospital.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But at the same token, though, it's like, but we also root for a final girl. So in your dark romantasy or your romance stories, you want your protagonist to fall in love. You want them or to have that relationship. You want it to work out, or something to work out for the benefit of the protagonist. In horror, the protagonist isn't always the person you're rooting for. Sometimes you're rooting for the villain, because of characters like Freddy and Jason. They have a following because they are interesting and they are, it's just that there's that fan base that follows them just as much as they are rooting for that final girl. But I also point out to people who are like, hey, so why should I read horror? And I always like to point out the fact that like everybody's looking for something to connect us to each other, right? Human beings are social creatures. We're constantly seeking connection, especially in this day and age of social media and internet and devices, right? So we're always searching for things that connect us. And, just like everybody wants to be loved, right? In romance stories, they're just exactly that. It's a love story where you're like, we can empathize and kind of in that way feel compassion for those characters. And when you feel compassion or empathy for something or somebody, you kind of feel that in yourself. So you're taking on some of that emotion. And so it's funny because like everybody also has fear, and everybody has feelings of dread. It's like why people listen to sad songs. Sad songs make us sad, but sometimes you want to feel sad.
But they also make you feel good because it's the story in that sad song you can relate to.
Right.
So it's
But
relatable.
yeah,
But
and same
okay,
with horror.
so what's
Horror
relatable
is
in horror when people are running around from, trying to get away from the murderer, the scary guy in the mask? How
yeah.
can that I relate that to my life?
So everybody also has this fantastic instinct. It's the mammalian reflex to, the predator and prey. It's the fight or flight. And whenever that gets activated, that's adrenaline just being dumped into your body. And sure, it's anxiety inducing, but you're also entering this kind of act or a silent agreement that you're like, I know I'm going to be scared, but I also love the feeling of that electric jolt I get, the drop at the roller coaster, when the roller coaster hits that hill, that big old drop. Everybody loves that feeling. Or I should say, not everybody, because obviously that's generalizing, but there is something to that, right? The excitement, also, again, you're doing it in a safe space. So that no matter what, you're going to be fine. Yeah. And sure, you're going to be, seeing this scene play out in your head, hopefully while you're awake, but sometimes, yeah, even in our darkest dreams. But at the end of the day, it's like, but I'm safe. And for some people, that whole feeling is like running a marathon. I talk sometimes about like how, stress and anxiety also can feel like tension, like a muscle.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And for a lot of people don't know this, but in order to work out those muscles, that means you have to like actually clench it so hard that it releases. It's forced to release. That's why we work out. Like, so when I have kinks in my back, they always say, well, you need to go do some back press. You need to do something with your back. And that actually releases all that tension. And I think that's true for every human being. That if you really want that adrenaline, you want that surge, you want to, cut loose and release, you can read a romance novel, or you can also read a horror novel.
You could. Now,
and
okay.
Also, go ahead.
With all this said, if we compare the the horror novel to the horror movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the horror, which I've watched plenty of horror movies, not by choice, but I've watched them. The horror movie, if you take the music out, it's not going to be very scary because the music's what creates that feeling of dread, feeling of, oh my gosh, because that helps to get your heart pumping. In a book, what gets you that same thing, that same feeling in a book, in the horror books?
The human experience. Yeah, the human experience is what we attach to the things we read. Now, for me, my brain is very cinematic. I was a theater film student at KU long time ago, and I grew up on films in general. So when I wrote my book, I was writing it as if it was a movie. So I had to I tried to describe it for the reader as if they were actually watching a film. And the thing is, the thing about writing, and you may know this as a writer yourself, is sometimes you don't have to include every single detail of the scene because we get to plug our own experiences into that. So with horror, we don't have the music, but what the smell of the woods, the smell of the woods, the smell of rain, of cold, the feeling of cold and, on your skin. And that's really particularly useful when you feel goosebumps, when you feel the full body expression of dread. And when I write, I try to make it as visceral as possible. So I'm talking about, I don't want you to just see the picture. I write what my characters feel on a visceral level. So when you feel fear, specific parts of your body light up. And I kind of clue people in, as they're, this is what it feels like to feel that dread of the unknown,
So as writers in the writing world, it is drilled into us, that whole show, don't tell. But I guess in a horror novel, that is so important because you have to get me to be there and feel what that person's feeling, not just tell me, oh, they're scared. I'm scared. My hair is tingling. You have to show me, and I have to be there.
Yeah. So, I have to show you, pretty much how this feels on your body, because that's, and again, because I'm expressing how it feels to me. And that's, as a writer, and I'm sure you, as a romance writer, you kind of do this. I connect with my own story. I connect with my characters. And so when I'm saying, okay, I'm going to write this scene, I'm not just like passively writing. I'm experiencing on some level these things that are going on because I want to share that piece of myself with the world. And when I share something, the readers out there, somebody's going to be like, yeah, oh my God, I totally know how that feels. And that's how horror connects us as well. You can sit there and watch, you can have 5 people watch the same film. We'll all have our own experiences, but the best part of it is that at the end of the day, we get to turn to each other and like, oh my God, that scene with the thing and the blood and the we all connect. We all come together around the campfire and share these stories just like they did in Friday the 13th.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, here's another question about horror writing. Before we get to your books, I just want to really flesh out the horror genre as a whole. So in romance, we have tropes. And, it's brother's best friend, enemies to lovers, all these tropes. And readers, if we don't have tropes in our books, they're not going to read them. They want to read for the trope that we tell them. And there's certain expectations in romance. There's a happily ever after. There's all these expectations. Does horror have the same things? And if so, what are they?
Oh, absolutely. So there are just as many tropes in horror as there are in romance, romantasy, even fantasy, and when you write a trope, like for instance, people who look up my book will find that it's called, it's been described as an extreme cosmic horror.
Okay.
And it will also include like urban fantasy, as part of it, the tropes that are involved in this book. And obviously as writers, we write tropes because one, every trope has the elements that have these elements that people are seeking. So for instance, in cosmic horror or Lovecraftian horror, the elements are things like madness, forbidden knowledge, the feeling of being insignificant in the face of a deity or monster or something greater, so great that you can't even conceive. You can't perceive it all because it's just too big. And so people kind of go in, and also there's these feelings of things like isolation and, and dread, where it's just constantly, there's something just to the left of you and you just can't quite see it. And these feelings are present in a lot of horror, but the specific elements are how we kind of grab our readers, right? And when I wrote my story, I didn't know it was an extreme horror. I didn't. Okay. I just wrote what I thought was like, oh, here's a horror story. Now, I used to be a firefighter and a paramedic, and also growing up on horror, and also experiencing a multitude of experiences a lot, some of it not so great. So my barometer of what is scary completely is different than a lot of people. So when I wrote my book and other people wrote the book, they were like, this is extreme horror. And I was like, okay, that's the first I knew. I'm the last person to find that out.
Okay, so explain that to us. You're saying extreme cosmic horror. Yeah. So I'm guessing cosmic horror is another subgenre of horror.
Yeah. So
and then extreme cosmic is it yet another one?
Yeah.
Explain what puts those in there.
So think of it this way. Okay, so cosmic horror is its own genre. And within that genre, obviously, are all the tropes and elements. Just like another genre of horror is the slasher film.
Okay.
Slasher book, which you're familiar with Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Halloween.
Right.
So each of these genres obviously have their or tropes. Or have tropes within them, but they all have similar elements, right?
Right.
But so I guess like the extreme, and somebody kind of, I remember somebody explained it to me that there's your horror, and it's kind of like spice, there's mild, medium, and hot.
Right.
But then like when you go into extreme cosmic or extreme horror, that's like adding even more spice, but with a lot of description that, kind of borders on, or they really touch on more of the taboo.
Okay.
So with horror, we kind of press the boundaries of what is it we're comfortable talking about. What is it that we're comfortable seeing in a horror film, or what is it we're comfortable like thinking about? And a lot of these elements involve things that are like excess gore, or body horror is also kind of one of those. Body horror, yeah, yet another subgenre or genre of horror. But body horror is obviously when the protagonist or people in the story lose control of their bodies and their bodies change against their will and become twisted versions, completely horrific twisted versions of humanity.
So like in some of the possession horror stories.
So again, another genre. Yeah, possession is the genre. So is the haunted house. Okay. Body horror, I like to think about for those of us who are into movies, 1985 John Carpenter's The Thing. Okay. Where something invades the body and it takes complete control over it.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of body horror, and but the extreme horror it does touch on things that are taboo. I personally, and this is kind of like a moral, ethical boundary, is I don't go into great description, nor do I celebrate things like child abuse, sexual assault, things like that. People who write extreme horror aren't afraid to cross some of those boundaries. But I leave all that off camera, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Like I might reference to it off camera, like this happened, but I don't like to get into it because one, I don't want my readers who may have experienced some of these horrible things to experience that again as a survivor myself. But then there's also splatterpunk. If you go beyond,
I've heard of that. Horror,
yeah. Okay, splatterpunk. It's like there's a line that I can't go, even for me, and splatterpunk is one of them. And for the fans out there who are watching this, if you're fans of splatterpunk, all the power. all the power to you. You know, I'm glad you enjoy it and it brings you joy. I'm not going to yuck somebody else's yum, so to speak.
Right.
But yeah, splatterpunk is where it's extremely gory, and it expresses and goes into great detail about ideas that are taboo. And it really pushes the boundary just almost for the sake to see how far our minds will take us, how far we can go before we're like, yuck, can't do it.
Gotcha.
You know?
Okay. Let's get back to cosmic horror. Just
Yeah.
name two movies that most people would know that are under the cosmic horror genre, real quick.
Yeah. So one I brought up was John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a classic cosmic horror movie.
Okay.
Another one that people would be familiar with, my God, there's so many. If I could only name one more, In the Mouth of Madness is a perfect example of a Lovecraftian cosmic horror movie.
I've never heard of it.
It's okay. And I highly recommend it. And the reason for that is because it has every single element that you can find in a Lovecraftian cosmic horror story. And, you know, we're talking about forbidden knowledge. Again, somebody, you know, finds a book or reads a book and suddenly they realize that the world is so much bigger than we think it is. And that we're not in control of any of it. And that there are forces that don't care about us as human beings. You know, they don't, you know.
Would that be Hellraiser? Is that considered?
So Clive Barker is my absolute, hands down favorite author in the whole wide world. I love his work. And Hellraiser kind of transcends genres in the sense that, yeah, it's kind of cosmic, but it's actually, you know, I would say it's more demon. But, you know, but there is so much of the cosmic horror element.
That box, with how you just described it, the box that everything comes out of and makes the human world just so small compared to the world that comes out of this box. And it's, you know, that's why that jumped out at me. I'm like, I just see.
Absolutely. So Hellraiser is a perfect example of something that can be described as both, you know, it falls under the demonic horror, you know, because we're talking about demons, but it also has the cosmic horror elements of people seeking, you know, sensation and wanting to, you know, go beyond the human limits, and unfortunately opening up a world to, you know, a place where these creatures live that love to induce pain and suffering. And that, I mean, so it is a great example of cosmic horror, or, you know, if you like the demonic trope as well, perfect example. Also the idea that, like, when the antagonist, Pinhead, by the way, is horrifying villain.
Yes, absolutely.
Horrifying villain. He talks about creating, you know, I will show you such sights, is one of the favorite lines, best lines in the horror film. You know, and the other thing is too, is he talks about creating suffering that is beyond your imagination. And a lot of, like, horror that, and this kind of what I got into writing, is because of the fact that I would read something from, you know, like Frankenstein, or I would read excerpts from Lovecraft, and, you know, or I read Call of Cthulhu, and they talk about seeing something that's so horrific that it broke the mind. Well, I was like, okay, but how do you quantify that then? I wanted to quantify it. I wanted to create a story where it's like, let me write something down that is truly so horrifying that you're afraid you would go insane. You know, like when
And
somebody's
that
like,
is
"Oh,
a
then they saw
great.
the monster."
Okay, well, that's it. Let's say you have sold me on cosmic horror, and then I find you,
Okay.
and I'm ready to go all in. Behind
Yeah.
you, we come. I can't read that. My eyes are bad. We come bearing.
We come bearing curses.
Okay. Is that
Yeah, we
the
come
only
bearing
book you've written?
curses.
But you've also written an
No.
anthology, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay.
Yeah, so this is my debut novel, from which I've created this universe, and this is the first of the trilogy. I'm working on the second as we speak, and this story is a cosmic horror set in the Midwest, and then the reason for that is because I personally think that there's something absolutely terrifying about the Midwest. If you drive through Western Kansas and you're like, what would happen if our car broke down right here?
All the time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, we're talking about, I wanted to create a story that people from this area, from the Midwest, because it's like, I find the Midwest terrifying, but I also, I wanted to create a story that, you write what you know.
Right.
And I've been to a couple of towns where that inspired the town of Havenshire, which is where the story takes place.
Okay.
So we're talking about an isolated small town, that it doesn't get many visitors, and the people who, are born and raised there probably never leave. We've all seen these small towns.
Right.
But now, if you take a town like that and make it even more isolated up in the hills, the Flint Hills near the Ozarks or in Missouri, and, there's one road in and that same road is the only way to get out, and that kind of sets the tone for the whole like atmosphere of the book, where it's very isolated and it's like time kind of almost stops when you get to this place. And on top of that, those hills where this town is, in, there's something haunting about that place. So, yeah, We Come Bearing Curses, my first novel. And yeah, cosmic horror about two brothers who grew up in this small town. And one of them was, thought he was going insane because he was seeing things and hearing voices. And and he was afraid that he was going to be institutionalized. And, and also they had a very abusive father. So he ran away from home, runs all the way to Kansas City, Missouri, ends up living on the streets, becomes an addict. And, because of a drug overdose, he actually dies. And when he dies, he finds out that all the things that he's been hearing and seeing were actually real. The monsters that live under your bed or crawl around in the dark, poking, those eyes that poke from within the shadow.
Uh-huh.
He knew he was seeing them and nobody believed him. And thankfully he was resuscitated. But when he came back, he had that knowledge that our world is very, very small. And they also got to pick up ways of fighting back against that darkness, against the things that, crawl in the shadows. His brother, on the other hand, stayed back in their small hometown, became a cop, and he has this sense. He knows that there's something wrong with the town. He's grown up with that feeling. But he's completely also in denial that there is something supernatural going on because of the fact that he saw how his mother was treated and how his mother was abused because of her quote unquote mental illness. And so he doesn't want to, fall into that as well. He was like, I'm not going crazy. I'm just going to ignore it. And so he kind of becomes this reluctant hero alongside of his brother, who receives a prophecy that if the two of them don't work together, that the world is going to end at the hands of a psychotic cult of, worshipers who worship the great old ones like Cthulhu. And so they have to band together. They have to get their friends. They're, pull every weapon they can and try to stop this from happening.
Do people have to die in horror? Is it just an expectation?
It is. I think that when you turn on a horror film, it's almost from the get-go, you're like, something, maybe not die, but something so very terrible is going to happen to somebody. And
I know you're scared to like a character because chances are they're not going to last long.
Sometimes, yeah. Well, and it's funny because when we watch our slasher flicks, it's almost like, okay, that's the dumb girl who's going to die because she was like by herself,
and he's the jock, so he thinks he's tough. He's going to get his head cut off. Yeah, exactly.
Right, and
you can name them all.
Girlfriend. Yeah, there's their girlfriend. They're going to go off together and get murdered.
They're going to be in the shower, of course.
Right. The thing with cosmic horror is that there's rarely a happy ending.
Okay.
There's rarely a happy ending in cosmic horror. Now, that being said, I do like not necessarily the happy ending, but the open ending where it's like...
Okay. What horror movie has a happy ending? Just because it's over and half your family are dead and you're still alive, that's not really a happy ending. It's just, thank God it's finally over. But is it really?
Yeah. So... Because
Jason never really died. I mean, come on.
No. Yeah. So realistically, let's say we watch a horror film. We watch a slasher, and we were to apply real life rules. Like I said, Sidney Prescott, the final girl from Scream.
Okay.
Now, she lived through, 8 more Scream movies?
A whole lot.
And, yes. And for a long time there, she would show up and she was like this emotional, anxiety-riddled mess. But then, personally, it's interesting because, by the 7th or 8th Scream movie, she was like, meh, it's another slasher. Meh. So there is no happy ending, unfortunately, in a lot of horror. Rarely is there a happy ending. Mm-hmm. The happy ending is that the person survived, and that's the best you get.
Exactly. Okay, so you said that's your debut, but you have another one coming out. So when is book 2 coming out? Can you share the title or anything about it? And are any my series, they all take place in Orlando Valley, and they're all a group of friends, and they're all finding their happily ever after. So the characters are, they're reoccurring, more or less. Is yours, are any of the characters reoccurring or not?
Yeah, so this all will take place in the kind of the world of the Curse Bearers. And so the Curse Bearers trilogy is the name of the trilogy. And book 2 is called We Are Broken Curses. And the title We Come Bearing Curses actually comes from how whatever our lives are, the pain, the suffering, that's our history. We come bearing our history like a curse. I
like that.
Yeah, and the reason I wrote it that way is because for me, when I wrote the story, I was in recovery from PTSD, from being a firefighter and a paramedic. I was, trying to, heal from that career. And when it comes to dealing with trauma and mental illness, it's kind of like there's, recognition of the trauma, or recognizing that you do have mental illness. Then there's the recovery process. And then there's post-traumatic recovery.
Right.
Or the who are you after you've been in therapy and you've recognized the things that you break the cycle of the things that are making you stay ill, right? And so I said, you know what, I'm gonna create a trilogy that at the heart of it is really about the recovery process, how it has been applied to me. And that, by the way, has changed so much and evolved so much over the years. And I think that's why this is one of the reasons why it's taking me so long to actually write the second book, We Are Broken Curses, because of the fact that, I'm still learning a lot about my own recovery process. And so, yes, the second book is We Are Broken Curses, and that's actually going to kind of follow the characters after they survived the first book. And I'm going to show, and I'm going to show, and I say, okay, not to spoil it, some of the characters survive, but I also wanted to show that, like, after something horrific like that happens, you don't come out the other side clean. You're not like necessarily like, oh, well, that happened, but look at me now. I'm so much more resilient and
right.
And I've learned a valuable lesson too. Usually a lot more of the like, God, something horrible has happened to me and I really need to find a way to work through this or I will get sick. And so a big part of that is showing these characters' journey. Okay.
So you have the two books of the future trilogy. You've written though an anthology, haven't you?
So I'm writing an anthology as well because sometimes as I'm writing, I get to a point where I'm kind of stuck, and sometimes the best way to get unstuck is to just set it aside and maybe just keep writing, write something else. You'll find inspiration in other ways. But I also wrote a short story, which is being included in an anthology that's coming out in September. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to do a pre-sale at the upcoming Crypticon in Kansas City. Okay. But it's called Dead Avenue Volume 2. And my publisher accepted one of my short stories to be part of this anthology, and so I'm very, very lucky. I wrote 2 short stories, and the publisher's like, I can only take one, but I really want them both. So he's like, he did promise. He's like, yeah, so we'll probably include your other short story in the next book. So I was like, awesome. But yeah, so Dead Avenue is really the theme is that down those dark alleys all across the world, all across America, people vanish without a trace and nobody knows why. And some of those vanishings, this is the story behind those vanishings. Why, people just up and disappear, or, what happens down those dark alleys that we just don't see, and that's my short story actually takes place, follows a reporter who's investigating a historically traumatized house. We're talking about a place where, a serial killer lived, and just a series of unfortunate events happened all in this house, and he wants to investigate it and kind of make a story out of it. And unfortunately, he finds a lot more than he bargained for.
It sounds good. So, are you an indie publisher, or do you have but it sounds like you also have a publisher. So are you hybrid? How do you publish your books?
So, my first novel, I was completely self-published.
That's the one behind you.
Yes. So We Come Bearing Curses is completely self-published. I wrote it. I submitted it through Amazon or Kindle. I also submitted it through Ingram Sparks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that way it's available to a much larger everywhere. Yeah. But then the editor of the first book also has his own publishing, small press and an indie publishing company. And so he sent me, when I wrote the story and I sent it to him, and they finished putting the book together and got the copyright and all that, he sent me a message. He's like, well, congratulations, you are now a traditionally published author. And I was like, huh? He's like, yeah, so it came from a publishing company, and it's been being distributed by that company, and they're using their resources to help me, get this book out there. That's part of the traditional,
right,
publishing tract, right? So I guess he's like, yeah, now you're a hybrid published author. You self-publish, and you get to be published through us. And it's like, how's that feel? And I'm like, I have no idea. I just wrote a story.
Okay, so where can people find your books? Well, your first that book, and then the anthology.
So the anthology will be released in September, but if you happen to be in Kansas City, August 16th, and you happen to stop by Crypticon. Crypticon, yeah, it's our local horror convention.
Very cool.
You will find me at a booth hosted by Kansas City Book Beats, and that's a local nonprofit that helps authors and artists get their kind of works out there. And I'll be sharing a table with some fantastic authors as well, who all write horror. And so I'll be actually bringing in copies of the anthology with me as a bit of a surprise pre-sale. But it'll be available.
It's not a surprise anymore. People are going to know.
Damn it. You got me. All right. So, yeah. So, you'll be in the know if you know, I guess. But yeah, so it'll be out there, and when it gets fully released, it'll be available on Amazon. Since Ingram Spark will carry it, it'll be available through Barnes and Noble, all your big bookstores, and then also any of the smaller independent stores. Our local chains, they can actually order it for you.
Absolutely.
Because it'll be available. And then for me, it's really important for me to make my book not just available for people to buy, but for people who necessarily can't go out and just buy a book, all the time, or even as ever. I put my books in my local library. So I recommend them. So yeah, very important to me. I want, I think that nobody should be denied a book just because of the dollar.
Absolutely.
I think it's important that we get as many stories out there as possible, not just for my sake as an author who I want to share this story, but also because I think that somebody could pick up a book like mine and read it and be inspired to write their own.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. I try to get it into the libraries as well. And then good news, my first book is actually being turned into an audiobook. So I have a narrator. We're currently writing it. We're working on it together. And
very good.
I'm very excited. And I'm working my butt off to make sure to try to get it out before Halloween.
Very good. I was going to ask, are they on audiobooks? So that's awesome, because I know so many people only listen. Audiobooks are huge now. They have just erupted in the past year. I would say. And it's true, because we're such a busy society, busy culture, that we don't have time to sometimes just sit and read a story. Right.
So we listen to books while we're working out, on our way to work, sometimes at work. Just don't let your boss
while you're
find
cleaning the house or cooking dinner. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And also, the great thing about audiobooks, I'm dyslexic, terribly dyslexic. I'm surprised I wrote a novel sometimes. I'm like, how did that even happen? So between ADHD and dyslexia, I don't know how this was even born. But for me, it's hard. It's hard for me to read. And because it takes forever to read a book for me. So if somebody says, "Hey, can you read this book for me?" I'm excited to read anybody's stories. But I always tell them, like, just know that it takes me a really long time to read a story, physically, because of the fact that it's hard for me to read. And it's so weird because, like, for people out there who have ADHD and dyslexia, I can read one page and I end up reading it 3 times because of the fact that I couldn't, like, retain that information, until my brain was ready.
And I'm glad you brought that up. All 3 of my boys, my 29, 26, and 23-year-old, have all been diagnosed by the Center for Dyslexia here in Tennessee with dyslexia. They were all diagnosed in elementary school. And they all read, but they all prefer audiobooks because they can, it also comes to, I read them out loud so many stories growing up because I wanted them to be able to read and listen higher. And of course, there wasn't any audiobooks like there are now 20 years ago. And so I am there. I totally get it because all 3 of mine, they're prolific readers through audiobooks. And so many people are like, that's not reading. Yes, it is, because you know what? They are getting the book, they are understanding the book, and they are getting into literature. And then they tell me to buy the book, and I read them. So, yes. But that could be a whole nother podcast, and maybe it should be, because that's dyslexia and reading disabilities is my little, thing I get on, because I raised 3 boys to be very successful in life with dyslexia. So, yes.
And I also agree. I mean, and again, another podcast could be, absolutely about the fact that, stories are written also now to bring, voices that were previously never, represented.
Absolutely.
Into light, we get to share the, underrepresented voices now.
Yes, we do. And that's so important. But you know what? We have been on here a long time. So real quickly, tell everyone where they can purchase your books. I know you already have, and where they can find you on social media.
Oh, absolutely. So, my We Come Bearing Curses is currently available anywhere that books are sold. Okay. So if your local bookstore doesn't have it, they can order it. And then if you happen to be, in Kansas City, again, I'll be selling copies at the Crypticon.
What dates is that?
That's going to be the 16th, 7th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. It'll be that weekend. And I will
what month?
Of August.
August, okay.
Yeah. And so I'll be there selling my signed copies, sharing stories. But if you go to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, all these stores can actually order a copy. And if you can't afford to buy a book, ask your library. You can make recommended, and a lot of people don't know this. I didn't know this. You can make recommendations to your local library, and they can actually bring in a book. If they, they'll review it, but they'll bring in a book, And then, of course, Amazon, if you have Amazon Unlimited or Kindle Unlimited, my book is available on there. It's available for free, Perfect. Yeah. So, nice to have that e-reader.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, it's a lot of fun. And also, by the way, because you've been so kind to have me on here, there's a link that I wanted to include for anybody who happened to be here that will give them a free short story featuring the main character of We Come Bearing Curses.
Yes, and that will be linked in the transcript below. So that would be wonderful. So if you're interested in grabbing that free book for listening, you all can grab that. It's a short story. And I was making sure you were saying that. That was a note I had. I wanted to remind you to do that.
Thank you. Yeah. And then also, again, with Dead Avenue, they will also be available anywhere books are sold, because the fact that we want to, make those books available to everyone possible.
Very good. Zach, it has been wonderful talking with you. I have enjoyed it, and I don't know if I can read a horror, but I do want to try. So there you go. You have stepped it. It might take me a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But
I always tell this to everybody who's new to horror and kind of curious about my book. I tell them, look, if you can make it past the prologue, you'll be fine.
Good to know.
The prologue sets the tone for the whole book.
Well, I have KU. Maybe I will download it and give it a go. I will let you know, and I'll tell everybody.
I can't wait to hear your thoughts.
There you go. Awesome. Well, Zach, thank you so much for spending your time with me and telling us all about your books. I appreciate it. And do you have anything outside of book 2? Do you have anything else coming up?
So I also have written a children's bedtime horror story.
Oh, good gosh. Okay.
That's my elevator pitch.
I might be able to read that one. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I've written the story. I'm actually looking for an illustrator. So if somebody's watching this right now and they're like, I love to illustrate, I'd love to hear from them. And you can find me on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, under Zachariah Chamberlin. And also my website, zachariahchamberlin.com. But yeah, I told a story to kind of get my daughters, they were like, oh, Dad, I'm afraid of the dark, and I'm like, what are you afraid of? And they're like, oh, the monsters in the dark. And I'm like, oh, baby girl, you don't have to worry about that monster anymore. And they're like, anymore? What happened? And I was like, well, Daddy ate all the monsters. That's why you don't have to worry about them. And so that's actually the story. The title of the story is My Daddy Eats Monsters.
Oh, wow. I like it. That is so sweet. Yeah. A horror story that could be seen as sweet. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Zach, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to getting to see some of your books out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with me on Books, Banter, and Beyond, the podcast for readers, writers, and all things bookish. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. I look forward to seeing you again next week. And until then, grab a good book and happy reading.